Hello, welcome back. My name's Jack Jennings, and I'm just doing a follow-up to the previous lesson, the previous video discussion rather, talking about the connections between Indian classical music and blues. So now I'm going to actually just explore another reason why there's a similarity, and this one is to do with sort of hierarchical structure of note choice within a scale, or put differently, Raag structure. Okay, so with Indian classical music, Raags are when you've got a scale, but then you can use different combinations of on the way up and different combinations on the way down, or certain combinations of notes will be seen as giving the real true sound of that Raag. So it's not like you've got a scale and there it's a blank canvas for you to do whatever you want. It's like the scale has certain qualities that you're looking to focus on certain notes, or you're looking to combine certain notes together repeatedly because they have the true essence of the Raag. Okay, so this is a really powerful idea within Indian classical music that really is the strongest, most dominant aspect of the music is the system of Raags. I think that's kind of quite safe to say that's the most powerful force in Indian classical music is the system of Raags. So now what does that have to do with blues? Now the thing about blues, I was talking to a student today, is that the way that blues works when you get more into the more detailed style of phrasing with what we call hybrid blues scale, where you're combining the major and the minor scale together. Both minor pentatonic and major pentatonic. There's a way of like combining those together. So when you do that, you don't treat it as just a scale where you can play anything on the way up and anything on the way down. You actually treat that with respect to the combinations that sound good and the ones that don't sound so good. Now blues players, they're not really taught this necessarily, or they don't really think about it in terms of strict rules, or at least I think most of the people that I've spoken to about this don't. I've never really heard people talk about it so much like this before, but it's definitely very consistent actually when you break down the blues players' solos. There's particular combinations that work and others that don't. So for example, if I'm playing hybrid blues scale, first of all, if I just play the minor pentatonic, you've got like the first, the flat 3, the 4, the 5, the flat 7 and the 1. So it's just the sort of top octave. There's the bottom octave. But if I played the major pentatonic, I would have the first, second degree, third degree, so the major third degree, and then a 5 and the 6, so fifth and sixth degree. So 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 1. Now, if I was to do those together, if I played every note in the pentatonic, minor and major, I would have 1, 2, flat 3, 3, 4, maybe even the flat 5 if we use the blue note, 5, 6, flat 7, and 1. So, okay? With a lot of chromatic notes there, and even you might even get a flat 2 sometimes in the ending part of the cadence. So there's a lot of notes there, a lot of chromatic notes, but a blues player wouldn't play like that. He wouldn't play all of those notes just back to back. But what they would do is do things like so I'm going like 1, flat 3, 3, 5, 6, 7, 1. So I'm not using the second or the fourth on the way up. So, you guys, everyone's played Johnny Be Good, so like... But you've probably played it in B. That kind of thing. So just that phrase has got so much information in it, because if we go back to D for a moment, so this, like playing the flat 3 to the major 3 to the 5 to the 1, or a lot of time the 5 6 1 instead of the 5 7 1. So these are things that there's a lot of choice here. You can do a lot of different things, but it usually sounds better going like that rather than. See, if I do it the other way around, if I go major third, minor third, fifth, that doesn't sound very good. But if I go minor third, major third, fifth, now we're in business. Now it sounds like blues, okay? So just the idea of going, this way up, or this way down even, sounds better than. See, again, that major third, minor third root doesn't sound good as minor major root. So that combination sounds better. Now that's we don't have a Raag that does that specifically, because even Raag jog, which is similar to blues, you don't play the major and the minor third right next to each other like that. There's a kind of sense of phrasing that works better, right? That, in a sense, is basically like what a Raag is. Even the way that the second is used in that, so doing more of the hybrid stuff again. Often you can do going up to the root, but then using the second as a kind of a little afterthought. It's the second. And there again, second. Or going like. Going down to the sixth. Just these different little things, So I'm just getting carried away now. So just these different things that have that effect of you're choosing the note that works better on the way down, on the way up. Again, it's not really strictly codified in blues, but it is something that I always thought that had a kind of resemblance. And there aren't that many examples actually I can think of in Western music that are like that, because if you take a mode, you take a scale, major, minor scale, or different modes, you can kind of just run patterns through them. You can kind of just play them in any way that you want, to a certain extent, and they yield, nice results. You can just sort of take a scale or the minor scale, and it's just accepted that within a scale you can just run a sequence through it and it will sound fine. You don't have to worry about jumping over a note or avoiding a certain combination. All the combinations just work fine. So God, I haven't played this kind of stuff in ages. Or minor scale. You can just run a sequence through it, and you're not worrying about avoiding a note in a certain direction. So with the hybrid blues scale, I think it's the closest thing in Western music that we actually have to like a Raag structure. So if you look at Raag jog, for example, this is actually kind of similar to the blues hybrid scale. It doesn't include quite as many notes, but it's got something similar going on, because in Raag jog we can play root, third, fourth, fifth, flat 7 on the way up, but on the way down you use the minor third. So in Indian music this would be the sa, ga, ma, pa, ni, sa, ni, pa, ma, ga, sa. So ga is used for the major third and the minor third, and the basic idea is that you can use the major third on the way up and then the minor third on the way down. And you can do things like you can go up a bit and then back down, or you can go up to the minor third and then the major third. So you can be quite kind of picky about trying to find as many different ways around those two combinations, those two choices, but you basically have to make sure that you don't go flat, third, fourth, fifth. You can't just go to regular minor pentatonic up, and you can't go and sort of go chromatically. Sometimes there are some cases where musicians have gone chromatically down, but very, very rarely. It has to be done very, very carefully, and it's usually done more with expressive bending technique, like so it can sometimes be done as a kind of graceful bend, but usually coming from the fourth. That's the fourth coming down to the minor third. If I do the major third to minor third, it's like that. So it can be done, but you have to do that really sensitively. So that's just an example of a rag that's quite close to the hybrid blues scale, but the hybrid blues scale, you can include actually quite a lot of different chromatic sequences in there. But even just things like duration of notes, like how long should you stay on a note? Because things like in the the flat 5 in the blues scale, you can use that note, but if you land on it and you stay there too long, then that's not going to work. So that there's certain rags that it might have a note, but if you spent too long on that note, then that wouldn't be correct for that rag. So even just things like this, like timing duration, and then on a deeper level, even things like microtones, because in blues you can do things like that flat third. You can do a very sharp kind of microtone of that, and that can work. But you can't do that on every note. You can't do that on the fifth. That doesn't work. Or on the flat 5, you can do a really flat version of the flat 5, so it can be on the fret, or you can do a really flat version of that note. And even between the 6 and the flat 7, there's like a I always found that an interesting little part of the scale where you can do a really flat version of the flat 7. So instead of, you can do a little very flat 7. So these are things that they sound fine in blues, but if I did that with another note of the scale, it might not work. So there's this kind of hierarchy of different notes, and there's a way that each note can be kind of treated differently, and that in essence that's kind of like the concept of a rag. Now, what makes Indian music different, again, is that Indian music has a multitude. It has like hundreds of rags. So maybe with blues we kind of have the pentatonic, pure minor, pure major. We have the hybrid. Maybe then you could do like a kind of Dorian infused or Mixolydian infused blues. You could kind of stretch it in different ways, but in Indian music we have hundreds of different rags. So we've got a huge wealth of all of those different melodic frameworks. So the idea has been fully expanded. So you couldn't really say that Indian classical music and blues have got the same level of that blues is not as expanded as Indian classical music. It's just that it hasn't been stretched out to cover all the different kind of tonalities. But the thing is, it doesn't really need to be, because it's not so much of a codified thing with blues. It can just be much more of the individual style and expression. So we don't have these kind of agreed rules of like what the blues phrase has to be. But then again, it does have its own aesthetic, it does have its own sense of style, and if you step outside of that, then it's not really going to sound right, or people are going to think that you're not doing it correctly. But they won't say, well, it's not correct because you're doing X, Y, and Z. They'll just say, no, you just haven't got the phrasing. You're just not. You don't sound authentic. You don't sound like a proper blues player. Whereas with Indian classical music, if you played a rag incorrectly, they could say, well, I can tell you that's incorrect because you're not supposed to play Shuddha Re after Sa. You're not supposed to play Sa Re. You have to play Sa Ga. So there'll be like a scientific reason why it's not right. So Indian classical music is much more sort of scientific like that. But I just thought it was interesting that, to me, blues is kind of the closest thing we've got in Western music to like the structure of a rag. It's just that blues maybe only has one rag sort of floating around in the ether, whereas Indian music has kind of like hundreds and hundreds of them. But the thing about blues is that the blues style of playing, can be applied to sort of any scale. So, I mean, this is way too much to talk about in one video, really. But, for example, you could just take a major scale, or you could take a more like exotic scale. And you could, so, like, for example, you could take a more exotic scale and you could still sort of play it with like a blues fingerprint, with a blues kind of feel to it. So, for example, that's very off the cuff, but you start doing different things with that scale. But you could still use a lot of blues kind of expressive techniques in that scale. So blues has kind of got a way to also be expanded if it needs to be. So yeah, I hope you kind of found that interesting, a little bit of a different thing to be talking about, but these things are not very, this kind of video is completely unrehearsed. These are just things that I've thought about, and I'm just trying for the first time to actually kind of display it as well as I can on the guitar. So I hope you found that interesting, and see you again next time.